Welcome everyone to the first ever edition to the State of the Union presented by Covalent. We have a very exciting team of us here today, ConsenSys zkEVM. And as everyone may have heard, a zkEVM is considered the holy grail of scaling Ethereum, as it combines the transactional throughput of a zk rollup with the network effects and developer tooling of the EVM. However, implementing the EVM and the zk rollup has been very challenging, and it was thought to be years away from development. But right now we have actually a zkEVM that's live. That's going to be live on the 28th, which is ConsenSys zkEVM. And we're super lucky to have Declan on board today to get to talk through some of the zkEVM stuff and run through some of the exciting things that his team at ConsenSys has planned. And so without further ado, Declan from ConsenSys, I'll let you quickly introduce yourself and also give a high-level overview of what you actually do at ConsenSys.
Thank you, David. Thanks for having me today. Super excited to, talk to Convening and talk about the zkEVM as well that ConsenSys is operating. So first, a little bit about me and my journey in Web3. We'll take a step back. So I actually first got into blockchain crypto about 5 years ago, 2017. Was looking at sort of different blockchain platforms like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and I thought, wow, especially with Ethereum, like, this is something that is really interesting. It could provide real utility to the world. Like, I have to learn more about this, right? And I was super interested in finding real use cases for this. So in 2017, it was like, okay, there's these public blockchains. They're kind of struggling to scale. Ethereum was kind of going through its crypto kitties phase at this point, clear congestion.
A good old day.
Maybe, yeah. So I thought maybe actually on like the enterprise side, we would have a bit more luck in sort of proving out some interesting use cases. So I kind of started my journey looking into different ways to sort of have multiple parties, interoperate or collaborate on a network in the enterprise space. Did that for a couple of years, worked with a lot of great companies and great projects, but they never really kind of like went anywhere, sort of hit a ceiling. And it was at that point I was like, right, how do we actually continue to find real use cases, but also that scale? Sort of started my journey into looking at scaling solutions, especially on public blockchains. There's a bunch of different L2 scaling solutions at that point. Plasma, state channel, some of these are still relevant today, but the kind of conversation moved quite quickly to rollups, especially at that time, mystic rollups. And then ConsenSys actually said that they're leading up a rollups team. Would you like to come and sort of manage this? So I came over just over a year ago. And then sort of been leading product for the rollups team and specifically the zkEVM as well. And what does that mean? What do I do? So basically determine what should we be building and why should we be building it? So really just sort of like driving the roadmap and the strategy for the zkEVM. And that's me.
That's awesome. That's super exciting stuff. You're literally leading the frontier of scaling Ethereum. What do you think are some of the most exciting parts of your role at ConsenSys so far, like your everyday?
Yeah, interesting question. So definitely getting to work with really smart people who are sort of really pioneering the frontier of technology, of the internet. That's definitely an amazing feature of working in the space. Working with ConsenSys specifically, like we have so many other amazing product teams, so many amazing individuals who have created market-leading products in different segments of Web3 as well. So it's amazing to get to sort of collaborate with those and really brainstorm on how we can think about the full Web3 experience in like a more, collaborative way. And on the sort of R&D side as well, like the ConsenSys R&D team is phenomenal. Had people that were sort of responsible for helping to design the engine API and deliver the merge. So actually getting to sort of interact with these individuals, sort of understanding what the latest is and zero knowledge, that's also a huge bonus.
Yeah, ConsenSys is super awesome. Actually, CodeFi was one of Covalent's first customers when we started out as a startup back in the day. And we also obviously have worked with MetaMask, and we're a customer of Infura, and now we've partnered up with ConsenSys zkEVM. So we're also super excited as the Covalent team to continue our efforts and collaborations with ConsenSys. So yeah, that's a super interesting background, Declan. And why don't we actually take a step back? As much as everyone wants to hear about what's next for ConsenSys zkEVM, I kind of love to hear you talk through what's the background of ConsenSys as a company, for those listeners who don't know too much about ConsenSys, and also what's the genesis story of the ConsenSys zkEVM. So could you walk us through that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So for those that don't know ConsenSys, ConsenSys is an OG in the space, founded in 2014. Our founder, Joe Lubin, was also one of the sort of co-founders, co-creators of Ethereum as well. So we've been around for a very long time, seen it all as a company, the ups, the downs, highs, the lows, all the sort of craziness of Web3. What do we do generally? We're sort of like a leading Ethereum software company, a leading infrastructure company. I mean, you mentioned a few of the products already, David, like MetaMask, Infura, Truffle as well, which is sort of like one of the earliest ways to actually develop on the Ethereum blockchain as well. We manage open source public resources like Hyperledger Besu, which is an execution client on Ethereum, Teku, which is a ConsenSys client. We have R&D projects like Ganark, which is sort of enables you to create zero-knowledge circuits. We have an NFT platform, R&D, investments, like really the whole gambit of things you can do in Web3. Like ConsenSys, you know, is involved, and you probably, anyone listening to this will probably have used a ConsenSys product without maybe even realizing it. So that's kind of the story of ConsenSys. Like the vision that we have as a company is really just to kind of help humanity upgrade to the objective trust infrastructure that Web3 is required to build a more equitable society. So in terms of the mission, that is unlocking the collaborative power of communities. We want to make Web3 universally easy to build, use, and access on. So all of the products and all the things we do are focused on that one mission. And where the zkEVM fits into that is actually a very interesting story as well. So this has a bit of a history that not many people are familiar with, but we actually started looking into the zkEVM 4 years ago. So back in 2019,
wow.
This is, not many people know this, but started in R&D, so we have an amazing R&D team. It's huge, like involved in lots of different areas. And obviously in 2019, it was quite clear like Ethereum was not going to scale by itself, right? As a monolithic blockchain, it was just trying to do too much. And we were looking at different scaling solutions, and rollups were kind of like the clear winner at this point. The EF sort of confirmed that there's going to be a rollup centric roadmap. This was the winning scaling solution. Lots of teams were focused on optimistic rollups as sort of like the short-term fix.
Yep.
But we were like, let's look at something different. We actually thought the zero knowledge would be a great tool to use to help scale Ethereum, and that wasn't a sort of common idea at that point in time. It is now sort of, but back then it was a bit of a risk. And then when you're actually using zero knowledge, it was, there was a lot of people working on this, and no one thought that we'd be able to sort of emulate the EVM, so actually the Ethereum virtual machine, in zero knowledge to scale Ethereum. So there's lots of different researchers thinking about this problem, and we said, hey, let's try our best to actually completely take the EVM as it is today, with very, very little modifications, and then prove that in zero knowledge. So a lot of teams said, no, we're gonna, to hell with the EVM, we're gonna kind of use our own virtual machine, which is sort of zk friendly. But we decided to do something different because we thought that would be beneficial for the ecosystem, and that's really kind of what ConsenSys is about in our mission. So we decided to go down that route in 2019. A lot of research, a lot of work. We actually published the first specification, the full specification for a zkEVM, and this would be a type 2 zkEVM, to use Vitalik's taxonomy. We published that at the end of 2021. I think it was around DevConnect, actually, if I remember correctly. So that was the first full spec. It wasn't, we had most of the opcodes covered, not everything, but it was enough to kind of get some early and good feedback from the community. And then we spent the whole of 2022 basically improving that spec, and at DevCon 2022, we announced our sort of revised vision, and we also announced we'll be releasing a testnet as well to kind of like prove out the theory. So it's not just on the paper, but people can actually go and use it and see for themselves. And then after that, we launched the testnet in January 2023 this year. Right now, it's in a sort of permissioned state. The reason we did that, we didn't want everyone just to kind of flood in and kind of the system, we wanted to make sure it was like secure and stable for everyone before really opening up the gates. The sort of response has been amazing. I think we're just about to approach, or around about 1 million transactions, over 100,000 unique wallets. So the adoption has been fantastic. On a sort of permissioned network. So the next step is on the 28th, we'll be going to a sort of public, generally available testnet as well, and that kind of just sets the stage for the next phases.
Wow, that's really interesting. So you guys were looking into the zkEVM even before Vitalik said that in the long term, zk rollups will win out on all use cases. So you guys kind of predicted that.
In a way, yeah. I don't think we can take all that credit, but we just saw it as there's a whole like range of scaling solutions. Let's just focus on what we can do to kind of complete the complementary solutions that people are working on. So that was why I went for the zkEVM. Interestingly, few other teams went down that path. So it's nice to kind of see a bunch of different collections of, research and engineering teams to come together to come up with different implementations, which is great for the space. But yeah, that definitely wasn't the common idea, back in 2019.
Yeah, you also mentioned that the ConsenSys zkEVM is a type 2 zkEVM. So I was wondering, could you actually jump into each of the 4 types of the zkEVM in more depth for those listeners who don't know what the 4 types are and what a type 2 zkEVM is?
Yeah, sure. So the whole type system came about because there were a bunch of zkEVMs popping up, and there wasn't really a good way for people to sort of label them or talk about them. There was lots of sort of like interesting debates discussing nuances. So actually, I think Vitalik came out with a taxonomy on one of his blog posts, which helped to sort of bring the ecosystem around a common labeling. So types are basically on a spectrum of how equivalent or compatible you are with the EVM. So at one side of the spectrum, you have type 1. I mean, these sorts of zkEVMs basically prove Ethereum as is. So you have the same execution client. You can use like a geth or a besu. You don't change the structure of the state. You use the hashing function ketchak. Like, this is all really incredibly hard to do in zk, but you get absolute compatibility with Ethereum and EVM. And then as you make your way sort of like up towards a type 4 is much what we call language level compatibility. And what you're doing here is you're not actually proving EVM bytecode in circuit. You're actually manipulating your language level source code into an intermediate representation that is easier to prove. So the benefit there, in theory, is that you can maybe get like more performance. You can start to do things which are slightly outside the limitations of the EVM, but not necessarily all of the tooling and sort of infrastructure from the EVM will work out of the box. So it's just a sort of sliding scale of trade-offs, and different teams have kind of taken different approach, which is great to see.
That's awesome. And one more thing that I always hear a lot is EVM-Equivalence. And to my understanding, that's what ConsenSys zkEVM is aiming for as well. So I was wondering, could you also explain the differences between EVM-Equivalence and also just EVM-Compatibility to all of us listening as well?
Yeah, definitely. This EVM-Equivalence is actually one of the sort of key benefits of the zkEVM by ConsenSys. And what EVM-Equivalence means is that you have basically the bytecode that you would, so how it works with Ethereum is you have a Solidity smart contract, you compile that contract into bytecode, and that's what gets executed on the Ethereum blockchain. So what we wanted to do with the zkEVM is basically be able to take the same bytecode, so the same smart contract where you don't need to rewrite, you don't need to reaudit, that same bytecode from that smart contract is the bytecode that you approve in the prover for the zkEVM. So the EVM-Equivalence, the benefit of that is that you can get, essentially, you can scale your dApps that are on Ethereum with 0 switching costs. So you don't need to create a whole new smart contract, maybe in a different programming language. You don't need to really tweak any of your tools. You basically take it as is and then deploy it on a layer 2, which provides you with scalability, but it also gets to keep the sort of security and decentralization of Ethereum due to the way that rollups work. So compatibility, on the other hand, it's basically more of a type 4. So rather than actually being able to take the same bytecode, we're saying, okay, you're going to use a different compiler, and the bytecode is going to look different underneath the hood to make it easier to prove in a zk circuit, which means you might have to learn a different language or use different tooling. So that's kind of what it means by EVM equivalence and EVM compatibility.
I see.
Yeah.
So for equivalence, you can reuse the already deployed bytecode in layer ones. You can directly copy and paste, dApp smart contracts to layer 2. And also, like you mentioned, tooling and languages are also the same as L1 Ethereum. So it's a direct plug and play, and you get all the scaling benefits of the zkEVM, right?
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
Awesome. So why don't we get further into the ConsenSys zkEVM? And one thing that I really wanted to dive into is that it's very clear that zkEVM has been a very hard problem that's been on the horizon for a very, very long time, since 2019, like you mentioned. And usually when there is a really hard problem, there's many different ways to approach it and solve it. So we all know that there are a few other teams building zkEVMs as well, notably Polygon zkEVM, Scroll, zkSync, and Starkware. So I'm really curious to hear from you what you think the lay of the landscape is, and also what do you think are some of the biggest pluses of ConsenSys zkEVM?
Yeah, good question. I guess I'll start by talking about ConsenSys and now zkEVM. What do we think really helps us just kind of stand out, and why we think it's going to be a great addition to the solutions already in the ecosystem? So I kind of there's three main areas. One we've already touched on a bit, which is this EVM equivalence. That is your being able to sort of take your dApp and scale it with zero switching costs, and that's really powerful because you get your 100% compatibility with tools, so they work out of the box. Obviously, ConsenSys has a bunch of developer tools we provide, so we know the pains of developers when it comes to having to use different tools and custom bespoke work. If you're a developer, you won't have to rewrite your smart contract or re-audit it. There's also some other things which are beneficial on that. One which is sort of not talked about enough, which is the fact that there is no vendor lock-in. So because you're complying to the EVM reference, if you're going to build a business or deploy a smart contract on permissionless EVM chain, then if you're not happy with that chain, you can just take it and move it elsewhere. Like, you're not locked in to an ecosystem. The EVM is already a very open and broad ecosystem, which is great for decentralization, right? It's great for permissionless.
That's true Web3 ethos.
Exactly, yeah, 100%. So that's why it's really important, I think, as well, to have EVM equivalence. So on that sort of sliding scale of equivalence, one of the things that are often touted is that if you don't try and keep EVM equivalence, the benefit is performance. But what we spend a lot of time focusing on is our prover and the sort of technology behind our prover and how we generate validity proofs, how we generate zk snarks. We've actually got some of the industry-leading efficiency there. Like, performance is not going to be a bottleneck for us. The benchmarks that we published earlier at the end of last year is we can prove 50 million units of gas in 4.5 minutes. And we have like many optimizations to sort of 5-10x this very soon. Our sort of goal is to actually get to a point where we can prove an Ethereum mainnet block, so like 15 million gas in under 12 seconds. I think the long story is that we're very confident that like performance of the prover will not be a bottleneck for us. So that's the sort of first key thing. The second one is this all comes from ConsenSys R&D. Like, you can, if you're a developer and you're thinking about which zkEVM should I be risking the future of my business is on, like, you can build with confidence based on where this has come from. Like, we're one of the most, if not the most trusted and reliable infrastructure providers, and have lots of blockchain expertise. Like, we delivered the merge. We've helped to design like key components of the Ethereum protocol itself. We have teams working on things like formal verification, so security is a big focus for us. Our actual like zk library that we use to generate the proofs, the snarks, that's in-house. So that team NARC, which is an award-winning team, works directly with our zkEVM team. So we have that sort of expertise all working together to create like an amazing sort of like synergy, I guess, I hate that word, but it is, when teams come together and can create something that's really powerful. The other thing that's amazing about ConsenSys is that our superpower is really our convening power. Like as you mentioned, there's other teams building zk rollups and zkEVMs in the space and rollups in general. We're really just focused on doing the right thing for the ecosystem as a whole. And we think that our ability to sort of gather players and find new and better ways of working together is something that we're in a really unique position to do. So we're super focused on like radical transparency, a real like research oriented focus, and a real focus on what is the next step for the ecosystem. And one of the things that we're sort of looking into here is the idea of what we call a multi-prover. So there's been a lot of talk recently about rollups having training wheels. Our rollup will have training wheels initially, as will everyone else's. So how do we get to the point where rollups have no training wheels and they're as secure as Ethereum, right? That's really the goal here. And one way to do that, which is proposed by Vitalik back at DevCon 2022, is to have it such that each transaction is proven by multiple proofs. Okay, so you imagine having like multiple zkEVM implementations proving a transaction such that if there's a bug in one, and by the way, like zk is really hard, like, bugs can happen, you're fine because all the others will cover you. Like a very good analogy for this is the reason the merge was so successful was because we had so many different client teams. So the diversity was really powerful to prevent any one issue from bringing the whole thing down. So we're really keen to like push the ecosystem forward by potentially coming up with this multi-prover system. And we believe that our convening power and the sort of ConsenSys, reputation as like a trusted provider is going to be really important for that. So that's number two. And then number three, which is really interesting, is that we're not really thinking of our zkEVM just as like a roll-up network. Like it's a very basic like view of what it is. We're thinking of this as like an integrated Web3 experience, right? So like as if you're a developer or a user and you're using Web3, like really it starts at like the wallet level and it can go all the way down to the infrastructure you're interacting with. Things like Luna last year, right? Sometimes users should be abstracted away from users. But that whole experience should be thought about in a way that's integrated. And we're in a really good position to do that because obviously we have, products and knowledge around every step of the user experience. So zkEVM for us is not just a network, it's the complete end-to-end interaction with Web3. And like, to give you an example, you'll be able to sort of connect in seconds with MetaMask. You'll have Infura as a sort of extremely reliable RPC provider, which allows you to ship fast and scale. It's managed every single peak and trough in the industry so far. We'll have say Truffle and Ganache, so the ability for developers to test their code locally, be able to fork the zkEVM locally and test it before deploying, and then also being able to do multi-network deployments. These kind of features that are really basic in Web 2, but we haven't really thought about enough in Web 3. And that will be like nicely integrated with the zkEVM code auditing and fuzzing. We have Diligence as well, which is an amazing smart contract auditing platform that we'll integrate with. Basu will be our execution client, so you'll get this optimized execution in your sort of block building on the rollup. And then also some of the the ability to sort of securely bridge and swap tokens on MetaBridge as well. We will have all of this not as an afterthought, but as like a collective experience for users. And I think that really sets us apart than some of the other sort of solutions in the space.
Yeah, that's incredible. One thing I love about ConsenSys personally, it's you guys are always building tools and products that pushes the whole ecosystem forward. As the saying goes, the rising tide lifts all boats, and you guys are definitely the rising tide for our entire industry. So big props to you, you folks. One thing that you kind of briefly mentioned, but I kind of like you to further elaborate on is you mentioned the multi-prover for zkEVM rollups and how there could be multiple zkEVM rollups coexisting. Could you kind of just dive into that a little bit more and explain what a multi-prover is?
Yeah, sure. So a multi-prover is a tactic to achieve a rollup without training wheels. Like I say, every rollup today and probably in the future will launch with centralization, aspects of centralization. There will be single operators for the sequencer and the prover. There'll be, upgrade keys which don't have long enough time locks and security counts, these sorts of things. So how do we get to a point where we can actually say that a rollup is as secure as Ethereum? Like, it has the same trust assumptions as the underlying layer. So that's a really interesting problem to solve, and I think it's one that we can only solve as a collective industry. Like, no one team is going to be able to do that itself. So the multi-prover is basically an idea where so let me take a step back. So with zero knowledge rollups especially, zero knowledge is extremely complex. Proving the EVM in zero knowledge is extremely complex. We aim to have all of the auditing and full specifications published. I think we're still one of the only teams that's actually published a full specification. It's a 300-page document, which is pretty hefty. But the reason we did that is to make sure that people could really understand what was going on, get more eyes on the code, being open source as well, in that same sort of mindset of sort of security. Formal verification as well is another thing. You can do all of this, and there could still be the risk of bugs. And I do believe that until that risk is until we've fully matured the tech, we won't get enough adoption, liquidity, users, because the risk will be too high, right? And then if you think about the next bull market, like, if there's a bunch more users who come into the ecosystem, where are they going to go? Like, we want them to go to rollups, right? That's where the execution needs to go to stay in Ethereum. So we need the tech to be mature or to be resilient enough. And the multi-prover is a way to have diversity in these complex systems. So if there is a bug, it's not a big deal. Like, the likelihood, and this is the cool thing, there's so many different implementations of zkEVM because they're so different, that the bug in one is unlikely to have a bug in another. So as long as you have a diverse enough set of implementations and you can achieve quorum on a transaction, then you really reduce the risk of using that rollup. And I think that is the next big step after all of the different teams have gone to mainnet. So I really hope to see that as that sort of conversation build throughout the rest of the year. Obviously, it's not trivial to have a multi-prover, but it's definitely feasible and possible. So that is the intention.
Yeah, that sounds like it's going to be good for our entire ecosystem. And I think it's really interesting because just like in layer ones, there's a lot of diversity. Similarly, I think, having that diversity, like you mentioned, in layer two would be very beneficial for all of us as a whole as well. And why don't we talk about our recent partnership between ConsenSys zkEVM and Covalent. So I'd kind of love to hear your thoughts on what led to your team's decision to partner with us, and how kind of Covalent fits into the broader zkEVM roadmap for ConsenSys.
Yeah, I would love to. So if I go back to sort of like, our mission is really just to make Web3 as easy as possible to use, to build on, to access. And obviously to do that, developers need, quality access to data. At the end of the day, we want to see amazing new use cases built using this sort of decentralized infrastructure. And to do this, we need to integrate with the top data provider. It's critical. So additionally, one of our main value propositions that I mentioned is making sure that existing dApps can switch over to the zkEVM with zero switching costs. And EVM-Equivalence is one part of that, but actually you also need to have all of the sort of infrastructure, the primitives required to do. And again, data is a key part of that, and Covalent is clearly an amazing data provider. So it made perfect sense in terms of a roadmap perspective. Covalent has a great reputation, great community, powering thousands of dApps. So when we got in touch, and as you mentioned, we already work on various other ConsenSys products. So yeah, we're super excited for this partnership. But I'm also even more excited now that we have it, to see what it will unlock for developers who want to build on the zkEVM, not just today, but months and years into the future as well.
Yeah, what we're really excited about is we're actually reaching a very cool milestone for our company. Is we're about to reach 100 blockchains indexed in total. That includes mainnets, testnets, app chains, rollups. So in our database right now, we have, hundreds of billion rows of index data, including every single block, smart contract, event, transaction from all of these chains. And, like you mentioned, developers will be able to kind of reliably and accurately use this data for our unified API to build any multi-chain dApps and deploy on these chains. So we started earlier last year at only 20, and now we've seen the growth to 100 chains in total. So that's going to be really beneficial for developers looking to build with data on any of these 100 chains, whether it's a mainnet, a testnet, or an app chain or rollup. So essentially, at the end of the day, we really want to be that standardized data layer for all blockchains in our industry, and also address the read scalability issue. There's a lot of teams working on like the write scalability issue, but not a lot of teams working on the read part. So we're very excited to partner with ConsenSys as well, to kind of include you guys as one of these chains we've indexed, and also help, bring more data visibility into your ecosystem for the private testnet, the public testnet, and also the mainnet that will eventually come up. Speaking of the mainnet, actually, after the public testnet launches, is there some sort of timeline or a countdown to when mainnet will launch?
So in terms of the roadmap, like I say, right now we are in a permissioned testnet. The next key milestone for us is the 28th. That is when everything will be public, will be open to general public. People will be able to deploy dApps and use that without any sort of permissions, which would be a huge step. Then we want to make sure that we have the foundations of the platform ready for our ambitious roadmap, and that so we'll do there'll be an upgrade to the testnet. And once we've done that, then we'll be able to sort of kick off all of the security steps. So, there's been a lot of talk even this week, right, around security and the risks of smart contracts. So we want to make sure that we are doing everything we can to secure users' funds. There will be, measures in place for mainnet to make sure that we can act appropriately if there are issues, but we don't want it to get to that point. But we want to do everything we can proactively. So that will mean sort of like pens down on the testnet, begin the audits, make sure the security is good, and then it will just be a straightforward march to mainnet. So we are shooting for as soon as possible. Once I have 90% confidence on a date, then we'll talk about that to get people sort of prepared. But yeah, until that point, we're still a little bit early. We are also exploring a bunch of different interesting initiatives around quests as well. So there'll be ways for, even before mainnet, people to sort of experience what this network will be like, and how it will be different in terms of focusing on the full end-to-end flow. And people will be able to test different applications, different dApps, and sort of activate different types of quests. So we'll be doing all of that even on the testnet itself, before we get to mainnet.
Yeah, I think one thing that we all really respect about ConsenSys is you have a lot of other companies out there and projects that are like moving fast and breaking things, and they're just rushing to get announcements out to get the hype. But I think ConsenSys is always really diligent, and there's multiple steps in place, and you guys make sure that everything is all set and secure and safe, and there's no errors before anything launches. So I think that's one part that's very underrated and not talked about enough, because when products do launch, they're super reliable, and it kind of holds our whole industry together. You guys are kind of like the glue with MetaMask and Furia, Truffle, like you mentioned, and zkEVM coming up now. None of these products have had any major problems, which is in this industry, there's hacks left and right. There's flaws in code. But for ConsenSys, that's never the case. So I just wanted to really highlight that. I also really wanted to be cognizant of time, because I realize we're coming up to the end of our 45 minutes here. But I wanted to give you a final chance to kind of say, all right, as we look forward to whether it's Q2, Q3, or the full year of 2023, if you're going to choose one thing to look forward to, what would that be? I kind of love to hear that from you to end on a high.
For the zkEVM? So definitely what I would call the march to mainnet. Kind of touched on it already, but I do actually think that is the most exciting thing to look forward to. And you actually made another really good point that our approach has always been to be really transparent with what we have today. We were never in the sort of business of like promising anything and then actually taking a while to deliver it. Like that's, we did a bunch of R&D work. We started a long time ago, but we only wanted to start really talking about it when we knew this was something that actually the ecosystem could benefit from and something that we could deliver on. And that's always been our sort of philosophy. So now we've kind of, we started the testnet sort of externally beginning of this year. I think our timelines are going to be a lot shorter than maybe other teams, and that's because we spent all the work previously to kind of get to this point and build it, and now we're just starting to really talk about it and tell people why we think it's going to be a really great addition to the solutions out there today. So the march to mainnet, especially after the 28th, we'll be doing lots of cool initiatives to show people how they can play around with dApps for developers, how bounties and hackathons and all this sort of stuff to start to get awareness around what this experience is like, such that when we do announce our mainnet launch, it's sort of it's a given that people will want to deploy there because they'll see that this is a very promising solution. So definitely for people who are interested in sort of plugging along, we'll be having a lot more stuff soon around that sort of march to mainnet.
Awesome. That's super exciting stuff. And how about for you personally? What are you looking forward to for the rest of the year? Whether it's crypto or ConsenSys, or narratives or trends in general? Yeah,
I mean, I'm probably biased, but I'm super interested to see all of the ZK use cases out into production, not only for scalability, but ZK goes beyond that as well. Privacy, identity, bridging, like the possibilities. I've seen so many cool team use cases and really smart teams working on different ways to use this technology in Web3. So super excited to see more of that. Obviously, we'll see all of the ZK rollups launch to mainnet this year. So just really hoping that the launches for everyone goes super smooth. We can convince people, or not convince people, but show people that this is like a technology that is really the future of scaling Ethereum, scaling the future settlement layer of the blockchain, of the Internet of Value. So super hyped for that. And I think that will be the story for 2023.
Awesome. Yeah, hopefully the ZKs are able to onboard the next billion users into crypto and kind of show them the merits of our industry, unlike what's usually shown in the headlines. That can be very misleading. But yeah, thank you so much. Had a fantastic time chatting with you. If you guys enjoyed tuning in, please check out Declan on Twitter. His handle is DeclanFox14. And if you're a dApp, reach out to him and get involved in the ConsenSys zkEVM testnet. Declan, do you have any closing remarks before we wrap up?
Yeah, if you're a dApp developer out there and you want to kind of experience some of the stuff I've been saying, then yeah, hit me up on Telegram, or you can go and check out the zkEVM on our website for ConsenSys, and you can apply there, and someone will reach out to you from the team.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Declan. And thanks everyone for tuning in, and looking forward to hear more exciting news from you soon, Declan. Best of luck in the ConsenSys zkEVM journey.
Thanks, David. Thanks, everyone.